We have Sister Danielle Bonetti. There you are. She is a sister of the community of St. Joseph. Sister Catherine Darcy from the Sisters of Mercy, and Ravi Ragbi, who is an immigration rights advocate. A bit of housekeeping. The immigration legislative ask, I think you all, before we do anything else on housekeeping, you're going to hear a cat, and I think you're going to see a cat behind me. That's my little boy, Max, who is very jealous that I'm talking to you right now. At any rate, the immigration legislative ask is on page 40 of that document, just so if you want to refer to it. I think we're not going to do any sharing of screens. It might be easier just to speak to the different issues. And we'll be stopping periodically to have discussions. Hopefully we'll have a robust discussion. I'd like to start, given that this is the last of our breakout sessions, I think it's useful to think about what happened this morning in terms of discussing the theological and anti-racist framework of the work that we do. And I think it's worth us, if I could kind of express a few thoughts, ask the panelists about a few thoughts, and really have a little bit of a discussion about that. And the other reason I thought we should do that is that immigration has become particularly a hot button issue. Not that it hasn't been at other times in American history. In fact, that's part of the issues, that just like racism, which has been around since the beginning of this, of the Europeans coming to this country, so immigration issues have been truly difficult issues for this country. We have a very checkered past as to how American society and culture looks at immigrants or newcomers. But let's start with the theology, which is the most obvious thing, that in all of our faith traditions, there is a core principle about welcoming the stranger or the alien or the foreigner or the person who is the other. That is deep in all of our faith traditions, including people, of course, who don't maybe have an established faith tradition, people of goodwill. That is just something that is very basic. When we look at American history, we can be proud, and I think the symbol is always the Statue of Liberty, of bringing your poor, your oppressed, to the welcoming people to these shores on one hand. And on the other hand, there is a terrible history in this country of antagonism to the immigrant. And I would like to posit that antagonism is deeply rooted in systemic racism from the very beginning. The whole issue around race, which is, as Reverend Booth talked about, as basically a social construct and a weapon to keep people down, is exactly what happened to the immigrants, most of the immigrants who came here, whether we're talking about the Chinese workers who actually built the transatlantic railroad, and then after they did their work, also at very low wages, they were thrown out of this country in the Chinese Exclusion Act. And the words around them, and when you look at things like cartoons, the words are things like yellow peril, and they're already that whole thing about using skin color as the trope for making sure that people stay down. The ridiculousness of whiteness as being superior or the standard especially came to fore for me, because part of my background is Jewish, that Jews and Italians at one point in their immigrating to this country were considered non-white. just arbitrarily. And why was that? Because again, for the white establishment to keep its power and its wealth. And of course, that's what the discrimination is all about. It is all about a system that keeps some people out and makes sure that those that do have the benefit of the wealth and power in this country keep it. So I just am throwing that out to you, and if I'd love to hear some responses or reactions to that. And of course, I'm not going to be able to see hands up, so.
Well, I
Yes,
actually want to make a quick comment to what Dahlia
yes.
said.
Yes, Robbie.
You said what the Bible, the scriptures talk about welcoming the stranger, but I also want to challenge us to understand who is a stranger, because if we are the children of God, right, and we have been adopted into the family of God, and welcome into heaven, etc., then are we strangers or are we brothers and sisters? So it is as you were talking about strangers, I realized we are really not, we shouldn't be calling ourselves strangers. We should be all welcoming because we are family. I will stop here, and I see Mark has his hand.
Mark?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Dahlia, and thank you for starting us off. And Robbie, thank you for your years of work. I just think that clearly it's a question of how do we address the other, but I think it's also a question of the concept of scarcity, that we think that there's not enough for everyone. So therefore, I'm going to get mine and my family will get mine, get ours, but the other won't get because there's not enough. But we also speak in the Bible about abundance. God has given us abundance. There's enough for everyone as long as we don't waste it. And I think that's really the overriding principle that drives us all, but drives many to exclude the other, because we don't realize there's enough, that together we can be sure that there's enough for everyone. I think that we have to, that's a new way of thinking. And many of us we're stuck in the old paradigm of scarcity, where we really need to look at least sufficiency, that if we work together, there is enough for everyone.
And I would suggest on that paradigm of scarcity was originally done very consciously in order also from an economic point of view to keep people down. Because one of the results of that, and this is also part of the system of racism, is that when you say that there are scarce resources, then those of us who are the poorest will fight amongst ourselves to get those resources. And one of the themes in American history is the fight or the conflicts between particularly the Black community who was forcibly brought here, whose ancestors were forcibly brought here, and the new immigrants, that they're scrambling to fight for scarce resources. And that actually is from my point of view, one of the great hoaxes of American history. And it continues today. Other comments? And again, if I don't see you, just call out.
All right, if you can't see me, I'll go ahead.
Yes.
Bob Elmendorf, I'm a Quaker with Old Chatham Quaker meeting in Old Chatham, New York. I read the book by Isabel Wilkerson, The Warmth of Other Suns. Everybody read that? Raise your hand if you read that book. You haven't read it? Well, we're all busy people and there are a lot of good books out there. But can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. That book is about 600-700 pages. It's just like John Steinbeck's books, except it's true. Everything that happened in that book is true. And one of the things it talks about, as you mentioned just now, is this idea of scarcity and pitting people against each other. And it talks a lot about how the blacks and the whites, and there were three big migration routes, as we know, and it talks about those routes, and it takes actual families that work to each one of those routes. The book is fascinating. The woman she's a total genius anyway. And she's friends with President Obama and everything. she's written so many books, as we all know. But anyway, I just want to put that out there to take a look at that book.
Thank you. Any other comments, or we'll move on? Our legislative asks this time around with regard to immigrants is going to be focused on primarily on undocumented immigrants or low income immigrants. And here again, to kind of have a philosophical framework about this. Undocumented immigrants is actually a new term in the American lexicon. If you look at federal law right now, even now, it talks about illegal aliens. So in other words, the idea of somebody who comes to this country who doesn't go through the usual bureaucratic processes to get documents, and usually now recently getting those documents are very, very difficult. There is a kind of assumption that somehow they are suspect or even perhaps evil. And I would suggest to you that that is one of the things that Mr. Trump really used from the very beginning to capture the racism, the underlying racism in the country by indicating that, and if you remember the famous terms, oh, those Mexicans, they're rapists, they're murderers, and Lord knows what else he said. Those were actually obviously euphemisms and dog whistles to say, watch out for the non-white person because they're dangerous. And of course, the thing, and we all know this, that undocumented immigrants, like many residents in this state, are contributing persons, are immigrants who happen to be undocumented, are valuable brothers and sisters of God, and also are major economic contributors to this state. But they, because of their status, they are in a very vulnerable position and often are not able to get the same access and benefits that even other low income folks can get. And one that we'll be talking about in a little bit more detail has to do with health access as a basic benefit that adult undocumented immigrants are not able to get. And the other piece of this is often because of their vulnerability, they tend to have low incomes. They tend to be, as we've been learning all throughout today, along with other poor folks, they tend to be the essential workers. They're the ones that we have been relying on and have been calling heroes over the last 2 years, and yet are treated as if they are somehow lesser than the rest of us. So the kinds of things, we have basically 6 legislative requests. And the first one is going to be on healthcare access. And I wonder, Sister Danielle, I don't know if Sister Catherine's still here, but if you could speak to that. You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Good. Okay. Again, this is one of our basic asks, and the right to healthcare is a fundamental human right, just the way shelter, food, healthcare, education are our basic human rights. And just because someone is coming to this country to work, but hasn't come in the ordinary channels, doesn't make them illegal or criminal. And it doesn't excuse the society from providing the basic rights. Currently, there's about 154 New Yorkers who are uninsured because of their immigrant status. And I know and have experienced working with dairy farmers in the central New York State, on the Mohawk Valley. And they don't come for healthcare because they have they don't have money to pay the bills, for one, and they're afraid that ICE is going to pick them up. No matter how many times we would say, coming to the emergency room, we will not report you, they are very fearful, and the farmers will bring them if it's a life-threatening situation. But so their medical needs get untreated. And when they do have a crisis, they're left with gigantic bills that they have no way to pay. And you and I pay it because the hospitals absorb that bad debt, and that all convolutes into the whole cycle we're in with the most expensive healthcare in the world that still doesn't provide the quality. Immigrant New Yorkers have been, especially the farmer workers and the dairy farmers, they've been at the right in the front of the COVID battle. Their services never stopped, especially the dairy farmers. They go 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, because the cows don't go on vacation. And so they're always there. And many of them have come down with COVID. And thank God many of them have gotten vaccines because of the generosity of healthcare system, who went out to the farms and provided the COVID. But still, their ongoing exposure continues. It doesn't stop. One of the things in New York State is if a woman is pregnant, she does get a year of WIC's funding. She and baby will get health care for a year. And we're trying to extend that. And one of the ways that we'd like to address this terrible situation is that if we could include the immigrant workers in the basic healthcare plan. Now, we know that federal programs, even under the Obamacare, excludes the undocumented immigrant. However, if New York could make up the funds for the program, it would, in the end, save a tremendous amount of money for the state, for the hospital, the healthcare system. According to a report by Families USA, more than 8,200 New Yorkers died from COVID-19 due to lack of healthcare coverage. And there's probably about 2,700 of those were undocumented people. The other response that we're asking the state to look at is being able to make the undocumented workers eligible for Medicaid services, not available under the Medicaid income level of 138% of the income. To expand that to include up to the emergency Medicaid, which is a benefit that we do give even the undocumented, but to expand that program, and so that undocumented workers can access New York State Medicaid, and to extend the funds that they can access now, pregnant women and babies, to extend that another year so that they could be under care. So the funding of all of this actually can make sense, because there's, I'm trying to find that now. There is federal, that all New Yorkers up to 200% of the federal poverty level, regardless of their income status, if they could be given the basic health care, they can allocate some of that $345 million that New York policymakers can make them eligible. If they could allocate that, that would make them eligible for affordable coverage through the state-funded essential plan. Actually, this would be this, would flesh out what was lacking in what we've gotten from the federal level. So it's not undoable, and it's really, in the end, it's self-serving, because these workers are absolutely essential to our economic health. New York is still the second greatest dairy state, and these workers provide the majority of the day-to-day working on the farms. So that's going to be our ask, and we feel it's not only just, but it's human. It's basic human care, and so that's what we're advocating for.
Any questions or comments on the health piece?
Yeah. Can I just add a few things, Talia?
Yes.
Danielle just was clear about why we need it. I just want to go into that a little bit more, because these undocumented workers, especially farm workers, or you also have the delivery workers, the deliverystas, the restaurant, etc. They work on a day-to-day basis. So for them, giving up a day's job work is losing income, which is already very low. And as such, it's hard for them if they have to take care of a family of four, paying rent, etc. It is difficult. Now, in addition to that, they are worried about how much it will cost to be treated. And because that takes away even more money from the family. And as a result, people don't go to medical. No, Danielle has already said the problems with not having health insurance. So that we understand that, but also know that even if they could afford it, they don't know what the cost is, and therefore they're afraid to do that. So I want us to be, there's a lot of things that the immigration legislator we are going to talk about, but it's also incorporating minimum wage that will help the people through on rent assistance, that will make it easier for someone to be treated. And many times we are not treated, or immigrants are not treated because because they're not treated, they whatever problems they have just accelerates, and it becomes more of an expense, more of a crisis, because they have a pain on the side, but they have to work, and they didn't take care of it, and it becomes an appendix problem, and they have to go to foot surgery instead of treating it medically. So I just wanted to add those few ways that people has been affected by lack of insurance. Dahlia?
Thank you, Ravi. Any other comments or questions? And speak up if I don't see you.
Dr. Victoria?
Yes.
No? Oh.
Thank you. I probably have a question, but I don't have my hand up. If no one else wants to speak, come back to me. I do have a question.
I think Sister Carol.
Thanks. First of all, it's great seeing old friends, new friends on this call. I just wanted to share just the fact that I'm so glad these are our legislative asks. And as a faith-based organization, I just wanted to say, and I don't know if other people have worked with New York Immigration Coalition, good, because these are the same asks that they're asking for. And I have found that they have helped highlighted our advocacy efforts because of their campaigns. And so just recently with the health and the New York for All, just even that request to sign on publicly as an organization and to send memorandums of support. And they organized it so well. So because as a faith-based organization whose membership is older, getting older and older and older, it's really great to have these other groups. And I know Robbie from years ago, and thank you for all your work. As a faith-based organization, I know I can only do what I'm doing because of what these
I got it.
non-faith-based groups are also doing. So, but really great for all the coalition building and networking. Thank you.
Right. And let me make a comment. We've been working very closely with New York Immigration Coalition and also other coalitions throughout the state. And many of, in fact, our asks are based on the asks of many of these coalitions on purpose, so that we do have a united front and that legislators hear from various organizations. Was there any other question, Victoria or anyone?
Yes, thank you, Dahlia.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you for a beautiful panel already. I'd like to ask a question for any of you about the plight of detention centers in America. I've been working with some faith tradition leaders in Georgia because I was outraged about the women who were violated sexually through surgical interventions for sterilization, for example. And just if I may.
Dahlia, do you want me to answer that, or do we
Yes,
want to?
please. And I have
so-
a comment with maybe Sister Danielle too. Yes.
So
and Bob.
they used to hold New Yorkers in New Jersey, but they closed down those facilities in Hudson, Bergen, and Elizabeth. But so now they had to move those New Yorkers, and they took them to Orange County in Goshen, New York, upstate. I call it upstate, I'm sorry, but in Goshen, where they house they house most of them. We want to close them down also. And in addition to Orange County, there is 3 more further closer to Buffalo. I wouldn't use upstate, downstate and name identifiers. Yeah, there's about 3 more in the Buffalo, Batavia area around that federal courthouse. I don't have the name. I can easily get the name for you, and I'll actually post where you can find the detention centers nationwide as well as in New York. I'll post it on the chat. We want to close down the detention centers because obviously no one should be in detention as they go through this process. But then the other problem comes up is, are they going to be transferred to Georgia or Alabama? I spent a year in Alabama when they took me down to Alabama, away from resources, support group, etc. So we have a challenge in knowing how to close. We want to close it down, but how do we keep our people here, our families here? There's a lot of problems within the detention centers, similarly to prison and jail. The detention center is actually a jail or a prison, so that we face the same lack of food, lack of medical, etc. But then they are also mistreated verbally. They are also abused verbally, emotionally by the guards, understanding that people are going to be deported and there will be no accountability because no one is there to hold them accountable because they have been deported. So there's a lot of violence in the detention centers. Out of the problem, and there is no very little protections. So in immigration, in prison, in jail, there is some protections for the person who is in the prison, but in immigration, those protections are very small or limited. I'll pass it back to you. If there are any questions, you could ask me. I'm happy to answer, but I'll pass it back to Dahlia.
Thank you, Robin. Bob? You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I toured the, I mentioned this earlier, I don't know if you all heard this or not, but I toured the Batavia immigration, it's an ICE center, okay, in Batavia. because we worked with Ansar Mahmoud 15 years ago. It's a long story, but anyway, I got a tour of the facility by the warden. He went to the same college I did. That was the only thing we had in common. Okay. Now, that facility had hundreds of men in it, and they were housed in rooms. You know how it is, like with dorms, bunk beds and stuff. And what they do is, that was what I call a soup to nuts facility. It's different from some of your other detention centers. This had everything. Oh, they had enough food and everything. It's not they were starving. It was a whole different situation. The 37% when we were there were on psychiatric medicines. I know because the warden told me. Okay. Number two was they had solitary housing units. I saw the solitary housing units. There was a row of them. And right next to that was the holding tank. So when they pick up a guy and they put him in the holding tank, and there's a big glass cage. Okay. That is like, this one was maybe, I don't know, 10 feet tall. And by then we were so upset with the prison and everything. We're waving to the guy. You know, we don't care. He's waving back. He's, you know, he's not getting out of there. He's going to, so what they do is they process them all the way through. They have courts. Courts are right in there. We talked about earlier about there aren't enough courts for mental health courts and everything. Oh, but the feds, they got the money for the courts. There's judges, there's courts, there's everything that's in a courthouse. There's every kind of clerk, paperwork. So what they do is they process the men all the way through. Now they could be there months, depending upon other legal situations and whatnot. And then they fly them out in planes. And so he says, the warden says to me, you know, he says, we don't have a problem here with contraband because this is no touch visits, no contact. You know, he got everybody's in, you know what I'm talking about. So who brings it in, right? The guards bring it in. So they had the federal marshals. That's when I began to understand about how many federal marshals are in this country. They showed us what the federal marshals do when the cars come in. They run mirrors underneath the cars, see, to check for drugs. A lot of you guys know this, but it's, then I talked with, in order to arrange the tour of the prison, I talked with ICE in Buffalo, because the women on our committee really were the stellar people. And they arranged the original meeting with the director of ICE in Buffalo, and he is over the warden. And I asked him, you know, I was talking with him and I said, here's who's going to be in the prison when we go in. Here's who I want to be on the tour. I said, I want this journalist, this, that, you know, from the Rochester Democratic Chronicle and whatnot. And all of a sudden, he says, wait a minute. He says, I'm over the warden. I'll decide who you go in with, you know? So we didn't go in with any media people, but as you can, this is 10, 15 years ago. You can see, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was a
Right.
horror show.
Right. Thank you, Bob. It you know, the horror stories are really there. Sister Faith, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so it's going to add to another horror story, unfortunately. Recently, I was listening to a panel on that same prison, and it seems that periodically they transport certain prisoners to a gas station that's between Batavia and Buffalo, and just drop these men off, inappropriate clothing, no language skills, and no other assets to assist them. So finally, the Vive and the Jericho Way group in Rochester began to get calls from someone who had a little concern about the welfare of these folks. Gas stations attendants called this group Vive or Jericho Way, and they've been coming to pick these people up and trying to help them get to some kind of a place where they will have clothing and food and assistance until they can get them further help. It's a terribly strange situation, but those two groups in Buffalo have really come to the assistance. I don't know why the prison is letting these people out in this strange place, but it's really an awful situation.
I wanted to mention that in Rensselaer County, there is a detention center, and there has been recorded abuse of women there. And this is actually a good segue, if I may, to our second legislative ask, which is called the New York for All Act. And what this act does is, on a statewide level, prohibit local law enforcement and other local officials to basically collude with ICE folks in arresting people. And if you remember back only the short time of a year ago, that we had 4 years of what I would call 4 years in hell with regard to how immigrants were treated all through the country and in New York State. The good part of New York State, where there were sections of this state that were, though they didn't want to use the word, sanctuary cities or sanctuary areas, where there was agreement, including in Albany, where there was agreement that the police, if they were to arrest somebody who looked like he or she might be an immigrant, they would not ask for their immigrant status. That, however, did not happen in other parts of the state. And the whole point of New York for All is to make that kind of respect for the privacy of immigrants, and when they're arrested, that there is not this undue abuse of them or collusion with ICE, to make that a statewide law. I would also suggest to you, we don't know what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years from now. And the other reason why I think New York for All is really important to have those protections is, who knows what the federal government will look like in 2024. And at least to have those protections in New York State would be important. A couple of other provisions of the New York for All Act is that local officials are prohibited from sharing sensitive information, including immigrant status, with immigration law enforcement. ICE is prohibited from entering non-public local and state property without a judicial warrant if they're thinking that they're going to arrest someone. And by the way, people are still being arrested. And also that if a person is approached or interviewed by ICE, that they have the protection that is what I consider a due process protection, that they are given a statement of what ICE will be asking them and their rights under that, to not have to answer that. And actually the immigrants have to sign that statement that they understand that. And then the last part of it is that statewide databases would not be shared with ICE. Any comments on that? Ravi, do you have any comments on New York for All? Or?
Yes, it's so in 2018 when they arrested me to deport me, one of the things I found out is that a lot of people don't know those rights they have, that they are entitled, they have to be taken to in front of an immigrant judge, so they sign away their rights. There was a study done by NYU Immigrant Rights Clinic where it showed that people with representation have a better chance of winning their case, I think like 15 or 20%, whereas people who don't have representation, it goes down to like 3%. So part of this representation for all is to help people in detention. And I think it's even broader than that, where it is going to help any undocumented persons who end up in the deportation process to be able to get representation, and therefore have a better chance of fighting to stay here. And that is very important because of the fear and because of the lack of knowledge, people are not able to access those rights that they have. So it is very important we do this. In New York City, I'll just end with, in New York City, there has been funded for pro bono lawyers for people in detention, and it has made a huge difference for those communities. So what we want to do is replicate it throughout the state. Dahlia?
Yes, and actually, that's the second ask that we have on the on the legal side. It's called the Access to Representation Act. It's a kind of, in some ways, a companion bill to New York for All. I was surprised when I was researching this. I had no idea that a person who is in front of or is in an immigration court, whether in a detention center or otherwise, if they're an immigrant that is facing deportation, unlike other low-income folks in this country, they do not have the right to counsel. This is what Ravi was referring to. And that means that only those immigrants that can afford it and can actually pay for a lawyer will have that representation. Ravi mentioned the thing about only 3% of people in detention centers who do not have lawyers actually end up winning their cases and getting asylum. Even for those people who don't end up in detention centers, and there are thousands of undocumented immigrants who are seeking asylum right now, the statistics are awful as well for them. If you are an immigrant who is seeking asylum and you cannot afford a lawyer to go to immigration court with you, then you have a 15% chance of getting asylum and being able to stay here. Otherwise, you have to be deported. On the other hand, if you do have a lawyer, as Ravi said, either pro bono or you pay for a lawyer, you have a 78% chance of getting permanent residency. So we can see how important it is to have that representation. Now, to be fair, this particular act, the Access to Representation, is one of those legislative proposals that probably won't be passed this year. It's one of those things that we're putting our oar in the water because it is expensive. Some of the information I've gotten is that it probably will cost about $100 million to be put in a fund for government-appointed lawyers. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done. And in fact, the way government works is, even for those things we dream about, we should say them and we should advocate for them. Any questions on either of those legislation or?
Just a quick note. Yeah. Everyone is entitled to a lawyer, but they are not given a lawyer like criminal justice. So they have to pay for their lawyer, and there are very unscrupulous lawyers. I'm telling you, when I was in Bergen County, there were lawyers who would just take the money and not do work. The problem was that these are the only people that we could reach out to. So we would hope that, we'll pray to God that maybe in this instance, I will be helped. And it's grasping at straws. And that's what happens inside detention centers or immigrants facing this. So this is why we want to have this fund to be able to help people go through this process. Dahlia?
Thank you. The third legislative ask on the legal side is called Court Notice That Plea May Have Immigration Consequences. So whatever your immigration status, let's say you are a permanent resident, but you're a non-citizen, and you end up in a court case, like a criminal court case or a family court case in particular. Because you are not a citizen, it is possible that the penalty, if you lose that case, is deportation. And this is a tremendous danger, obviously, for people who get involved in the court systems. Now, we do have technical assistance. So let's imagine that somebody does have a lawyer, but in a criminal case, but that lawyer is not an immigration lawyer. That lawyer may not even know about these consequences. We do have a system of regional immigration assistance centers that provide technical assistance to non-immigration lawyers about these kinds of cases. What this proposal would do is to say upfront to the defendant that you just need to know that one of the penalties could be deportation. And I don't know, Robbie, if you want to comment on that one as well.
No, no, that was,
go ahead.
it is important about this. So
Right.
you've said it, you summed it up nicely. And I will just wait for, for questions on these asks.
Right. And let me just do the last one and then we can have a general discussion. The last one is, I think we've talked about the whole need for lawyers, pro bono and low-cost lawyers. And while there are many organizations that are working very hard to provide those legal services, the need is tremendous. New York State does have what it calls the Liberty Defense Project. This is out of the Office for New Americans, that does provide free legal assistance to those facing deportation, and also provides other legal advice on, particularly on things like citizenship and permanent residency and employment authorization. Right now, there's $10 million that the governor has put in that fund, which is the same as last year's level. And we're asking, and this is also a New York Immigration Coalition asked for an additional $5 million to make it 15 million. We still are a long way from really providing enough legal advice, but at least that would be a step in the right direction. And now we're open for questions and discussions and other issues. I don't know if
Yes, can I say something?
Yes.
Yes, I had a friend who was deported back to Nigeria, and when he was arrested, he was locked up somewhere in upstate, and the immigration agents refused him visit. And the reason they did that may be because they don't want anybody to know that he's locked up, and they don't want him to have access to a lawyer. So by the time we know it, it takes some few weeks, and he got deported. He has no access to anyone out there because he cannot be visited. I don't know why his case is very different. So to get an access is a problem when somebody is arrested on immigration case. So this is something we can look into. How can somebody be visited? Because they don't want anybody to know that he's arrested, because the lawyer will go for bail or something.
Correct.
So immigrants has no much talk. They can, besides that, the stigma of being, you're gonna be deported, everybody get arrested. That's another problem. No access to lawyer, and these are most people are left their country of origin, trying to escape some religious and political persecution in their countries, and they are not welcomed. Deportation become the option because they don't have no paper to present to the police when they are stopped on the street. And when some people got deported and get killed at home because what they're running after, they go back again, they persecute them, they kill them. That's a very big problem. This is not hearsay. This is something I know. It happened to somebody I know. He went back home, they deported him, he died. They killed him. So that's it. Yeah. It's an opportunity, many of us, many of immigrants, opportunity to come over here and seek for a greater opportunity and, work towards your life to upgrade yourself, because of your country is not going to help you. And it's something, it's very scary,
Yes.
It's very scary.
Other comments? Yeah.
I actually, what Chief Moses said, what Daniel said, we all are talking about how we understand how horrible it is. And part of the reason that this happens is because we are isolated. Immigrants are isolated. I am still facing deportation, right? And that isolation means that we, as a target, it makes our targeting and our trauma so much more easier for it to be imposed, right? So the ICE officers, the correction officers will be able to treat us, to abuse us. What we need to do is we need to find a way to reach out to those who are isolated and be able to connect with them so that we provide a safety net for them, right? And I had developed many programs to do that. The key is the houses of worship or the people of faith. When we have our people of faith going into an immigration court, the judges have recognized who you are and literally would watch what they say because of your presence. So it's not just about, it is more about who you represent, your witnessing, your faith, that makes that difference. And with faith leaders who has talked directly to officers, they reported to us that they will look at the collar and you can see in their eyes that I'm going to hell. I'm going to hell if I don't respond. So what we have to do is we have to be able to connect to each other, build a strong support network, and be able to use this network as a defense against the harshness of the system. The local sheriff, for instance, if he's so anti-immigrant, the local electeds. So this protection has to come from our heart, our beliefs, our values, and we stand on that. So that's another topic. We don't have time for that today, but we can always come back together and I can share the ways we can do this, especially now. And I'm going to end with this. What has happened during the pandemic is a lot of things have gone electronic, right? So it is a certain remoteness to that. So instead of you, Faith, coming down to New York City, you may be able to connect online, and therefore your presence is still felt without your physical person being there. I have to look into that. I know it exists, but I have to understand it more carefully before we start talking and training about engaging in that way. I'll pass it back to you, Dahlia.
I just
If I could just say one thing, Robbie, you make an excellent point. That is an excellent point. You think you're helpless because of Zoom. You know what? You're empowered. I'll give you one quick example. You know that case, Attica, Afia Siddiqui. Everybody know that case? The Muslim woman? Raise your hand if you know Afia Siddiqui. Okay. Well, she's imprisoned in Carswell Federal Penitentiary, right? She never did anything that they said she did. Well, she was put in trial in New York and city and the whole 9 yards. Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I called down there to the court because they weren't letting in any Pakistani journalists into the main courtroom. They put them all out in ancillary courtroom. So I found that out and I called, because back then you could get right into the court, with different phone numbers and stuff. I called right into the court and I said, you know what I'm worried about? I said, you got a small size room. I said, you've just got a bunch of white guys in there. I said, you don't have any Pakistani journalists. You don't have any women journalists in there. You're not representing correctly. Well, holy Moses. Like somebody here said earlier, it only takes 3 or 4 calls, or even just takes 1 call. You think you need 100,000 people or something. You just take a few people. They went ballistic. They said, they backpedaled and this and that and everything. They didn't know who I was even. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So your point is well taken, Robbie.
Yes, I was going to say something similar, Robbie, that while this is very important what we're doing with the legislators, let's keep in contact and keep talking about this, because there are just so many important things that we can do together. And I do think faith communities being able to continue a network of support is extraordinarily important. That's wonderful. Other people?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Gloria?
Yes, my question is, I don't know, the reason why I'm quiet, because I'm trying to learn about immigration. I just wanted to know, could you still sponsor someone? Or they get rid, the system got rid of that?
So the
Go ahead, Robbie, and
sponsorship
then
is very
yeah, go ahead.
is a little more complicated. It depends on its particular case. Sponsorship means different things. So if you want to sponsor a relative, for instance, yes, you can. A lot of sponsorship still exists, but you have to explain to me what you mean. If you want to sponsor an Afghan family, is different than sponsoring your husband, your father, or your son, for instance. So immigration is very complicated, and it takes a long time. I only have 2 minutes, but I'm happy to keep in touch with you about this. And just quickly to answer the question of how immigrants have been treated throughout other countries, the US model has been taken out to the rest of the world. You see horrible ways Australia has been treating them. The African migration to Europe has been very mistreated. So we have to start from here to be able to make changes worldwide. Dahlia, you were going to say something.
Thank you, Robbie.
Could I just say one thing about that last comment? Again, going back to what we discussed before about scarcity, that it's all premised on the fact that there isn't enough. So we have got to protect ourselves. And that has become the model throughout the world. There are millions and millions of people now in migration throughout the world, on every continent. And it's really a global issue. We're one piece of it, but it's really a global issue. And again, it all goes to the theology of scarcity rather than the theology of abundance.
Right. Gloria, also partially to answer your question, right now the federal government's actually working on something and encouraging something called a community sponsorship circle, where 5 individuals or organizations can come together, get some training, and actually sponsor an immigrant who's here. Now, those immigrants will tend to be, right now, they're really focused on the Afghan refugees and SIVs who have come here. So I'm very concerned about the immigrants who, I've got to say this, express this. People keep talking about refugees and asylees as if they were different groups of people. A refugee, the reason they have the term refugee is a legal term, which means that you escaped from your country because you were in danger, you and your family. You ended up in another country that was not the United States. And from there, you applied to the United States for refugee status. And asylee, the only difference is that the asylee is in this country or on the border and is applying for, and it has the same conditions of danger and fear and so on, but is trying to get permanent residency here. But the asylees are the ones that are most at risk at the moment. Yeah. Well, thank you all very much. This was a wonderful conversation, and I so appreciate that we were able to get together. Looks like we have to leave and go back to the large group. So